Hello and welcome back. And you see this cheeky little tiny box here? This is a 4x M.2 NVMe to USB4 DAS box there. This is from ORICO and this is their new MixData Vault. It's one of a series of devices looking towards flash storage locally. So we are talking direct attached storage, of course, not network attached storage. Now this arrives right now at around 239 Nika on their own website. It's available on a few other retailers. Alongside that, there is a standard USB 3.2 version of this. Doesn't take advantage of USB 4, but does arrive with RAID support there. And although I talk about NAS quite a lot here on the channel, I've got to say I do have a soft spot for direct attached storage because I do believe there is a time and a place. And that time is definitely for me when you're looking at something of this scale. I mean, right now, looking at this, it measures around 16 centimeters by 11 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And it's only about a kilo in weight once we've got this fully populated. Of course, as it's M.2 NVMe, there is no hot swapping here. And I know what you're thinking, these look like SATA connections. Again, that's because they've used the same metal chassis for both the SATA and the M.2 NVMe version. However, if we open this up, inside there, as you can see, we've got an M.2 NVMe dedicated enclosure. Now, it's a plastic enclosure. I'm not a big fan of that. There is room for a small scale heatsink to go on top of your M.2 NVMe's. This is an ORICO M.2 NVMe. They sent two alongside this unit for review. ORICO haven't paid for this review. They've just supplied some hardware. They've got no control over this. I can say what the hell I want. But I'll say early doors, I like what I see. I think it's very low footprint. It's quite discreet in terms of its scaling there. I can definitely actually imagine me carrying something like this on the go. Although I will say, early disappointment for me, this does have USB 4, which is great, but that's it. There isn't a secondary port I could use for charging. It doesn't have docking station capabilities. I've already touched on the fact that it's JBOD, not RAID, which at this price point, I think is okay. But nonetheless, the fact that, you know, the lack of daisy chaining, the lack of an additional port there does mean I'm going to lose a USB 4 port on my client device. But moreover, this needs additional power. You can't power it off of just the USB 4 alone or Thunderbolt 4 connection. Now, it includes an external PSU, a 36 watt clip-on external PSU, but still I do believe there are going to be those that are disappointed that you can't just connect USB 4 power and power those M.2 NVMe. So we have seen a few enclosures with enough oomph coming off of USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 to get the job done, but regardless, you can't do that with this. I will say it arrives with quite a high quality USB 4 cable. It's one of those rope stylized ones here. Again, good, sturdy, it feels like a quality cable, but still would have liked to have seen power keeping this on the go through that port. And talking of power, it's worth highlighting that power consumption on this was, you know, understandably low, given that it's a DAS that uses 4 M.2 NVMe's. So when I had the system being fully accessed, that was with all the drives being accessed in a RAID 0 environment, I saw power consumption of around 8 to 10 watts. Now, when I had the system in standby, that was with all the drives ready in a RAID 0 environment, managed by my client device, but no access, it sat around 4.9 to 5 watts power consumption. And finally, when I had the system completely disconnected, but power running into the device, so complete and utter standby, it went as, or hibernation I should say, that went down to about 1.5 to 1.6 watts just sitting there in the background. So a very low footprint indeed. But when I was accessing all of the drives inside in that RAID 0 environment in the performance testing you'll see later, I did check on the temps. Now the temps of the individual SSDs never went higher than around 40 to 50 watts. It has a dedicated fan on the rear. Unfortunately, you have no control over that fan. We'll talk about noise later on, but when I had the system up and running, the overall temperature of the metal enclosure was dissipating quite well. I didn't see temperatures really any higher than around 33 to 35 degrees as I was panning cameras around this to see the temps of the ports, around the fans, the individual drive. Just generally, I didn't see any concerning temps whatsoever. And as for noise, when we were creating our RAID 0 on this, that was, I thought, a good chance to see activity on this and what the fans would do, because again, they're fully set to automatic there. we didn't really see much noise above really 33 to 35 dBA. You can see from the monitor there on screen, it did peak a little bit with background ambient noise, but as we're going to hear in a moment, that fan, even when it was gunning, really wasn't that noticeable. But really, for many of you, it's going to come down to performance. And I will say, I got good news and bad news about performance. So if we start with a single SSD, I had one SSD, one of the ORICOs there, connected into slot 1 inside this device. And when I had it up and running, I did performance tests of a 1GB, 4GB and 16GB test file on Crystal Disk, Atto Disk Benchmark and AJA. And the numbers for just a single drive in accessed over USB4 were pretty underwhelming, if I am honest. So the Crystal Disk performance numbers there, it gave me around 740 to 750 megabytes per second read over 740 megabytes per second write. Now when it came to Atto Disk Benchmark there, that went for about 104 to 106 megabytes per second read over 777 to 779 megabytes per second write there. Both of which, as you can see there, much less than a gigabyte per second. And finally on AJA with consistent read writes of around 700 to 750 megabytes per second. Now it was across the board on read and write, and again that was across 1, 4 and 16 gigabyte test files there. Now, why is that disappointing? Well, USB4, the connection there on the rear, can reach 40 gigabits per second or 4,000 megabytes per second total potential bandwidth. So each of those SSDs, and this is the SSDs that ORICO supplied to me, by the way, which again, if you get their Gen 4 SSDs, can reach a potential 7,400 megabytes per second. That is a huge drop in performance potential with a single disk in there. But what about a RAID configuration? What if these drives were RAIDed together? Maybe we saw something better, right? I took those 4 SSDs, each of them there, and RAIDed them together in a RAID 0 environment. I did that on a Windows machine. I didn't use a comprehensive high-end RAID card. I wanted to make sure things were as Billy Basic as possible. I let the RAID 0 be created and performed exactly the same tests. Again, Crystal Disk, Atto Disk Benchmark, and AJA on 1, 4, and 16 gigabyte test files. And the results were wildly inconsistent in terms of write. Read, I was actually quite pleased. Let's go through them. So with a Crystal Disk, I saw read performance of 2,200 megabytes per second over 480 megabytes per second write. So with Atto, I saw over the consistent 1, 4 and 16 gig tests, we saw a maximum read performance of around 3.13 gigabytes per second over 820 megabytes per second write. And finally, AJA is where those inconsistencies really bubbled to the top. We saw read performance consistently across the board, across all of our tests, of 2,500 or so megabytes per second. But the write performance there never really got outside much of 500 megabytes per second. But what you can probably see there on screen is really fragmented write there. The internal controllers on this device, I've reached out to the brand, are SATA internal controllers there. From what I could see, at least in terms of the happenings divvying out towards each of the individual drives there. Now, I'm assuming each of those bays is at the very least Gen 3 times 2 or Gen 4 times 1. Maybe less, I'm not sure. But overall, it did mean I was, at least in terms of read, filling up a lot more of the potential USB4 connectivity. But in terms of write performance, this never really gave me much more. And particularly when the single disk write performance was seemingly higher than the multi-disk RAID 0 performance in terms of write, that really confused me. For the price point and for the low impact, I'm still pleased with what I saw, but I think users need to be realistic about what the potential performance of this device can be. And when you are only spending a few $100s, your expectations need to be scaled towards that. This is not a highfalutin hardware RAID and high-end controller device. This is a budget M.2 NVMe box for USB 4 users there, and that performance is indicative of that. Does it make it a bad solution? No, but I think ORICO could stand to be a lot clearer about the performance potential of this box. Do I like it? I do, but really things like that lack of USB 4 direct power, the fact that it doesn't have RAID included, is just going to make it not for every deployment scenario. But let me know what you guys think. We're going to be comparing this against a few other devices very soon as we look at the growing number of USB 4 DAS solutions that have arrived in 2025 that I think are worthy of discussion, because once we've reached this performance number and the affordability of M.2 NVMe, remember, M.2 NVMe is as low as $200 for 4 terabytes. Things like this are becoming increasingly appealing to those that want localized storage. But just keep your expectations in mind and don't fall for the blurb that USB 4 on the outside means USB 4 on the inside performance potential. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.